much, Andrew, and thanks to everybody for coming. George said he's been very upset by the events of the last few days. I'm sure that's true for absolutely all of us, many of whom have welcomed the events of the last couple of months in the Arab world and who've seen such spectacular scenes in Tunisia and Egypt, and who now see these situations turned into a cause for war. And I watched some of the Andrew Marr programme this morning, and I had to switch it off. I had to switch it off when they had the chair of EDF came on to explain why he thought building more nuclear power stations was a good idea. But I had to listen to George Osborne before that, and it was one of the most sickening interviews, because while he talked about our brave troops, about we have the whole of the Arab world behind us and the United Nations behind us, a man who doesn't give a toss for the United Nations, by the way, he also could barely keep the smirk from his face, because they feel they have done fantastically well politically by organising this intervention. And this is a man who on Wednesday is going to go to Parliament and cut benefits and cut all sorts of things for the poorest people in this country. They're pushing through welfare spending cuts. At the same time, these cruise missiles that are being fired in Libya today cost $1 million each. Now, what would that do for the welfare spending in the United States or here if the money that was going on that could be spent on the people who really need it? Instead of which, we don't have money for anything here, but we always have money for wars. And this war was launched on the same day, as George said, where they launched the war 8 years ago, the war in Iraq, which is still not over, where there are still 50,000 American troops on Iraqi soil, where there is still a war in Afghanistan going on with increasing deaths. Only last week, 2 young children killed by American airstrikes. These are still going on. These wars have gone on longer than the First World War, longer than the Second World War, and longer nearly than both of those wars put together. And yet the lesson they learn from these is that they're going to take us into a third war in the region. And make no mistake, we know this is a hard argument at the moment, because people are taken in by the idea that this is about helping the poor people of Libya. But believe me that the people of Libya will not be helped by this intervention. They will be harmed by this intervention, just as the Afghans were harmed by the intervention, just as the Iraqis have been harmed by the intervention. The only people who can change the Middle East are the people of the Middle East themselves. Yes. And the last thing that they need is the old colonial powers going back there, telling them how to run their countries, which is what's going on at the moment. And you have these right-wing Tory figures. You have Berlusconi, who has plenty to cover up. You have Sarkozy, who was a man who doesn't give a damn about the poor people in France or anywhere else, who attacks immigrants in France. And you have Cameron here. They want to cover up their domestic policies, and they think the quickest way of doing it is to launch another war. And this war is about their strategic interests, their oil, their resources. It's about all of those things. We have to say no to any intervention. We do not want a war in Libya. We do not want the attacks that are going on in the Middle East. And what double standards are involved here? Most people acknowledge that the reason that the Arab League signed up to this no-strike, this no-fly zone in the first place, was because it was a quid pro quo so that Saudi could go into Bahrain. And at this moment there are 400 political prisoners in Bahrain, including the leader of the political opposition. We don't hear a word about that from the BBC. We don't hear a word about it from our government. We don't hear a word about it from anybody. That is the real hypocrisy in this situation. So our message is clear. The people of the Middle East are doing it themselves, and they have to do it themselves. Our job here in Britain and the United States and France and Italy and everywhere else is to say, hands off the Middle East, no intervention, stop all the wars and bring the troops home now. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Lindsey, and thanks for all of our speakers. I'd just like to make